Welcome to this week's edition of The Happy Grown Up, where we celebrate the challenges and joy to be found in life after 50. Today's guest for me is so special. In fact, I think he may turn out to be one of your heroes because he's very quickly becoming one of mine. Simply because the more I listen to his TED Talks and read his daily blog on his website, the more satisfied I am with who I am and with what I still can achieve. Chip Conley first created a very successful boutique hotel empire in California, and that certainly would have been enough of an achievement for any guy. However, he sold that hotel business when he was only 52 and became a mentor to a group of young guys studying another variation of hospitality, becoming the guardian angel of Airbnb. However, Conley wanted more out of life. He wanted more of a challenge. He wanted more of a way to share not just his success, his experience, but also this reawakening about what he had to offer others. And he founded the Modern Elder Academy, both an online and on-site, both in Baja California and New Mexico, kind of a university for everyone being proud of being a grown-up. And I am happily enrolling. And by the time we're finished speaking with Chip today, I'm guessing you are going to be too. Welcome, Chip, to the Happy Grown Up.
Oh, it's great to be here. Thank you.
Most people approach aging with a sense of dread, and yet you consider it a superpower. How do you see it in that positive light?
Well, first of all, the alternative to, the alternative's not so great.
Yeah, the other side of the lawn, yes.
Means you're dead. But, I think what we've done in the United States is we have defined aging purely on the physical level, beauty and brawn. And when you're young, you got more beauty, you got more brawn. But as you get older, things start to deteriorate. Yes, it's impressive to see, yoga masters putting their leg behind their neck at age 80, but it isn't very normal. And what I will say is that when you look at what gets better with age, most of the qualities of our life get better with age. We get more emotionally intelligent. We value relationships more. We're a better friend often as we get older. We're more spiritually curious. We build our wisdom. We have crystallized intelligence as opposed to fluid intelligence, which means that we can see the big picture better. We become culturally more curious about the world. Now, I know there are a lot of people out there who are older who don't fit this profile, but what I'm citing with all of this is social science research that shows everything I just said. And so what I've really wanted to do is to elevate the idea that how do we have a pro-aging message, not just an anti-aging message in the world? And Becca Levy at Yale has shown that when people shift their mindset on aging from a negative to a positive, they gain 7.5 years of additional life. So this is an alternative to the biohacking Silicon Valley bro, I want to live forever approach to longevity.
You cite the impressiveness of the United States being number one in gross national product, but we also rank, according to this survey that you found, number 38 on gross national happiness.
Actually, it's 23 on gross national happiness and 48 on longevity.
I'll ask you later who has a happier society and why we're lagging. But could one of the factors we rank so low on the scale be the result of the fact our constant insistence that anyone looking to make a shift or a change in the second half of their lives is going through a, quote, midlife crisis, instead of realizing that in our lives that the only thing that is constant is change?
Yeah. Well, Dan Gilbert, the Harvard academic, said on the TED stage, human beings are works in progress that mistakenly think they're finished. And it's as if, once we make it through our adolescent years, we expect that we're supposed to have it all together and know it all. And the reality is life is just one constant liminal opportunity to evolve. And so, yes, the midlife crisis premise came from a Canadian psychologist in 1965, but the premise behind it was sort of bunk. I mean, it was focusing generally on men, almost exclusive. In fact, it was exclusively focusing on men. And it was the premise being that men were frightened of their mortality and the physical process of their aging. And so often what they did is they would do something out of character, like buy a sports car or have an affair and do something that was sort of a short-term way of making you feel better about yourself. And, I do know people who have gone through those kind of midlife crises, but it's more what we see in Hollywood on American Beauty with Kevin Spacey than what we see in the general population. What we actually see in the general population in the U curve of happiness is there is a decline in life satisfaction that bottoms out around 45 to 52. There's a lot of reasons for that. We could explore what those are. And then with each year after that, and which each decade after that, we get happier and happier. And I've really wanted to, have the bullhorn to say like, hey, look at these statistics. People get happier after 50, and they are even happier at 60 or at 70, and women at 80. So for all these reasons, I have become a bit of a midlife activist.
Yeah. No, you talk about the transitioning in midlife from going from wanting to show off to wanting to show up. You talked about how that when we're younger, we lead with our ego, but as we put more stock in our power, we wind up the second half of our life leading with the soul. And also that we shift from short term vanity to long term health. I mean, they're great comparisons, and I just would love you to elaborate on that.
Yeah, I mean, the way we look at ourselves as when we're young is the way we sort of individuate from our parents is to actually start to build a healthy ego and a strong one that is clear about who you are. And the reality is that as we build that ego, we sometimes go too far, and that happens in all kinds of parts of our life. And we get so attached to that ego that the ego is in many ways, leading the dance. But it's around midlife that, Richard Rohr is a Christian mystic, Catholic priest, written 50 books. He's on our faculty at MEA. And, he said that the first half of our life, the primary operating system is the ego. But it's around midlife that it starts to shift to the soul because we have maybe a little bit more of a curiosity about the meaning of life. We want to see ourselves in a bigger picture of the world. And yet we don't have any operating instructions. Nobody gave us any warning this was coming. And so part of the reason MEA is around is to help people with that transition. And all the transitions that go on in midlife. Some of them are spiritual, some of them are career, some of them are marital, some of them are empty nest, some of them are parents passing away, menopause, physical ones. I have stage 3 prostate cancer. Sometimes there are diagnoses that come out of left field. So, we don't really have a society that has created the social infrastructure to support people in midlife and beyond. We do at the end of life. We have a lot of social infrastructure with retirement communities and assisted living, et cetera. And we do at the start of life. But in the middle of life, we sort of have a perspective, which is, you're an adult, solve your own problems. And we have almost no financial support or emotional support in this culture to help people in the middle of their life. And strangely enough, I guess, this is the time, according to this pharmaceutical industry, that's the peak time for people to take antidepressants is exactly at that point, 45 to 52, where people are at the low point of happiness.
Well, it's the reason why I, basically created the Happy Grown Up because I mean, I'm very lucky. I have a great support system. I had a great family. Not everybody has that, has that bonus and that gift. And I just saw so many friends, basically aging without understanding where they're going because they didn't want to retire. They didn't want to move to Sarasota or they wanted like they had a career that was good, but it wasn't satisfying. And so they wanted somewhere else to go. But also it's one of the nice things that I do here because it requires a huge shift is that when you speak, you echo almost everybody I've spoken to on this podcast and acknowledging that somewhere along the way after 50, we refocus our attitude when putting ourselves out there and we go from wanting to be liked to no longer giving a rat's ass what other people think. So, number one, sort of what instigates that change, but also if you don't care what they think, then you really need to know where you're going and you need help there. We need help there.
If you don't know who you are, you um, become what you do. And I know a lot of people who fit that profile. They're so attached to their work, so attached to their business card, so attached to an identity that has stroked their ego that when, for one reason or another, that career path changes, they don't know who they are. So yeah, I mean, it is essential that as we get older and we grow up. And by the way, the happy grown up suggests grown suggests maybe that you are finished growing, and I think we're more like the happy growing up,
I
because
actually tried that, but it just sounded so clumsy.
it
So
does it does sounds very clumsy, but it is, aging and growing are the same thing. I mean, let's be blunt for a second. When you see a 15-year-old and you haven't seen them in 2 or 3 years, you say like, "Hey,
you've
Johnny,
grown.
you've
Yep.
grown." When you say to a 60-year-old, "Oh my, how you've grown," they think like, "Oh, are you looking at my waistline?" And the reality is, we grow as humans like trees do. Now, trees grow up in the air. That's true, but they create rings. You know how old a tree is based upon their rings. You know how old a human is based upon the rings of wisdom, and the rings of wisdom are based upon life experience. And so we are growing our whole lives. It's just that we're not necessarily growing physically, at least not, in terms of height. In fact, we're sometimes shrinking. But the reality is, in terms of our intellectual, emotional, spiritual, relational, cultural way of seeing the world, we're continuing to grow. So, there's rings growing inside of us. It's just they're sort of invisible to the outside world. So I just think more than anything, learning how to get comfortable in your own skin just as it starts to sag is not a bad idea.
Well, it's because so much of our judgment is based on surface. So much of our advertising and perception is based on surface. I know we both share an intense dislike of
That's
the
all
term.
your fault. That's
Yes,
all
right.
your fault.
Yeah. No,
based upon based upon your career.
yeah, no, absolutely. Look, I plead guilty, and to more than that. Look, the magazine industry collapsed about 5 years ago, and it's funny how many friends I have in the industry who basically wound up not because they lost their job or not. It's because they defined themselves by what was on by their name on that masthead, and without that masthead, who am I? Where do I go? That's the first thing that I find upsetting. And the second is because of our culture and advertising and the way we perceive aging, we both share an intense dislike of the term anti-aging. I mean, I mock it because it's an impossibility, because regardless of your defenses, there's no way to stop that clock. But you also consider it misogynistic.
Oh yeah. Well, if you look at the anti-aging industrial complex and the hundreds and hundreds of billions of dollars it makes annually, it's making it almost predominantly and even exclusively on women. Now, men focus on this as well. I don't want to say they don't, but the advertising is about, in essence, making people and women feel badly about their natural process of aging. And so yeah, I think it's anti-aging is often anti-women, but that's also because we as a culture have indoctrinated ourselves to believe that women are defined by their looks
By their
and,
beauty. Yeah.
and their
Mhm.
beauty. So because of that, that it all sort of fits together very neatly and painfully.
Well, also too, it's that we've made it so that every time you get a new line on your face or you discover a new line, that means that your beauty has slightly diminished. It's just as opposed to say taking this as another stage in your maturation, another stage in your being a beautiful person.
Yeah, uh, it's a hard one, and the U.S. has really led the way on this.
Yeah,
Um,
unfortunately.
between Madison Avenue and Hollywood. But I do think we're seeing a shift, and you're seeing a lot of older women in particular, because the silver fox older man is always, the Richard Gere, the George Clooney, like, oh yeah, they're hot old guy, but older women didn't get the parts in the movies, and now they are, and now they're getting, Helen Mirren and Jane Fonda are showing up, and in some cases they've had some work, in some cases they haven't,
Hey, hey, hey! Some of the women that we love the most: Julia Roberts, Sandra Bullock, Kate Blanchett. They're all over 50.
Yeah,
Every one of them.
they are, and for a lot of the women, they're open to showing their age. They're open to letting their hair go gray. And there's always issues. There's that Canadian newscaster who truly lost her job because she went gray. Her employer actually even said that, which was sort of stupid. And said, you need to color your hair. And it's like, well, she didn't want to. And so, we have a culture that does prize youth. And, I think the most important thing for us to know is the thing we need to know as we age is it's not about being youthful, it's about being useful. And being useful is what will carry you forward. It's what will give you a sense of purpose. It's what will give you that sense that Eric Erickson talked about as a developmental psychologist around I am what survives me and generativity. So, how we get useful as we get older is pretty important.
But you also state that men kind of suffer in silence. Number one, they're not very often judged on their looks as much as their success. But nevertheless, I think sometimes men, I don't want to say have it worse, but it's a different kind of torment simply because in the same way that men don't ask for directions, they don't ask. They very often don't. Again, one reason for creating this platform is they don't ask for help, and they approach aging with just as much trepidation and vanity, but they kind of do it without telling anybody what their issue is.
The term quiet desperation is decades old, and it described the sort of company man who around 45 or 50 just didn't know who he was. And yet men are not socialized to be vulnerable.
Right.
And so when men let their friendship muscle atrophy in their 20s, 30s, and 40s, sometimes because of family and career, and men are not as good as women at multitasking. So women keep their friendships at the same time that they're doing many other things. Men don't. And again, these are gross generalizations, but the data is pretty conclusive. And so when a man hits a tough spot in his 40s or 50s, who does he turn to? Often he doesn't want to turn to his spouse. He doesn't want to look weak. I lost 5 male friends to suicide, ages 42 to 52, between 2008 and 2010 during the Great Recession. 3 of the 5 were entrepreneurs whose businesses went down. And so, long story short, that was a wake up call for me. And it really was, in many ways, the seeds that led to MEA, the Modern Elder Academy. The other seeds on the Modern Elder Academy really come from the name Modern Elder. When I joined Airbnb, the founders, the young founders, millennial founders, I'm a boomer, said to me after I'd been there for a few weeks, Chip, you're our in-house mentor. We love you for that. But you're also now our modern elder. And I was like, what the hell? You, what's a modern elder? And I don't necessarily think it's a compliment. And then they said, no, no, no. You're twice the age of the average person here. But the fact is, you're as curious as you are wise. And what we really appreciate about you is you are learning as much as you're teaching. And that really felt good. And the moment I heard that, I was like, yeah, the alchemy of curiosity and wisdom, that is beautiful. And it's different than maybe the traditional elder who might have dispensed wisdom. But we live in an era where I can learn as much from someone half my age as they can from me. Now, they're going to teach me different things than I can teach them. And so the term modern elder, yeah, came out of that. And, I decided to double down on it. 7 years ago, we created the Modern Elder Academy.
Well, it's funny because when we started this platform a couple of weeks ago, I have these algorithms that go every week. This kind of witty rules to live by. Well, the first algorithm is curiosity is the best moisturizer. I'm very glad you like.
You're an advertising man. I love it.
Thank you. Well, no, because so when I saw that when I listened to what you were talking about when the guys from Airbnb cited that with you by being as curious as you are wise, it was like, okay, this clicks. This is perfect. You also talk about, I was going to get to it later, but let's do it now because you expanding on this with the guys is you talk about an idea that you would love to explain called generations over dinner.
Yeah. Yeah.
You talk about, I think one of the TED Talks or one of the podcast interviews is the fact that if you look at the circle of the people you trust and the people who matter to you outside of your immediate family or your spouse, that very often most people don't have an age range that goes beyond 10 years in either direction.
Yeah.
And the people who I admire the most and who I've interviewed, echo the same thought that you have, the idea that no, get yourself other circles of friends, get yourself other demographics of friends. It's important to talk to people who are older. It's very important to people who are a lot younger, simply because they have a different sense of stimuli growing up. They have a different view of the world that you may not agree with, but it's important to see their perspective. And also you can learn from them as well as they can learn from you.
Oh, it's so true. I mean, we live in a world where most of us feel like we're in an echo chamber. Uh, and that's part of the reason why we have a bit of a polarization in the United States. And so, yeah, when we've surveyed people, what we found is that 80% of the friends that people tend to have, who they consider to be their closest friends, are people who are within 10 years older or 10 years younger. So they're in this narrow band of age similar to your own age. And so I think learning how to make friends outside of that band is really essential. We started Generations Over Dinner, which is, generationsoverdinner.com, for the express interest in actually bringing multiple generations to a dinner table to talk about really heady, interesting issues, everything from society problems to purpose to relationships. And it's been really great to see. We've even had as many as 7 generations at the dinner table. Now,
Wow.
in
Okay.
order to do that, you have to have some people, who are like 4 or 5 years old, along with people close in their 90s. But that's been beautiful. It's been a global phenomenon.
No, I love the idea of that. But I think sometimes older people get spooked out by younger people simply because of their facility with social media. Let me ask you this. Has social media benefited aging or has it made it maturity even more difficult?
Yeah, it's a good question. I can say pretty conclusively social media has not benefited young people. And I think the data there around the emotional state of people in their teens is pretty clear. I think for older people, it's a little different story. I think it's more mixed. I would say the advantage of social media for older people has been it's connected people who are feeling isolated, and maybe even physically, because whether they're living in an isolated place, because often when we get older, sometimes we move to places that are not in urban markets. But also it's, maybe they're physically like they are not able to get out of the house as much as they used to. So I think social media's helped there. And it's helped, with groups. Like if you have a group of people that you're really interested in learning something about, you have a common interest, that group of people, you might have only met them on Facebook in a Facebook group, for example. Um, so I think that's positive. I think where can be negative for older people is, some forms of social media like X or Twitter, you just see cranky people. And, they're not all old. They're desperate for sure, but sometimes they are. And they're just like, just old and crotchety and like, blaming, blaming, blaming. And in that way, I don't think social media has been very helpful for anybody, but especially for older people who just tell younger people they don't know how the world works.
Yeah. Well, I think also too it sort of creates a differential, and because younger people very often speak in a slightly different language and use different terminology. I think which throw the older people off, and they don't necessarily want to make the leap or the jump to understand what these people are talking about. When in effect, you're actually losing out by not doing so. Um, you you cite one of the things like that you talked about. You and Brene Brown talks about managing expectations, and in fact, Dr. Jennifer Hartstein, who's going to be a guest here in a few weeks, she calls it radical acceptance, and which is a very similar thing. But is this about slowing down? Is it about giving up on your dream? Is it settling for less, or is there something positive in this assessment?
Well, let's talk about Brené's language on this. She calls it the midlife unraveling.
But she says it's not. That's not necessarily a negative thing.
No, she doesn't, because I mean, when you first hear it, it's like, oh, unraveling sounds like someone
Yeah.
who's losing their mind. But she then said to me, when we first talked about this, Chip, have you ever looked at the word ravel? And I had not. And she said, take a look. It means something so tightly wound you can't get it undone. And that's how a lot of people feel in their mid 40s and maybe early 50s. They've got so many obligations, they've accumulated so much responsibility, so many things to do, that they feel just wound up, and maybe sort of limited in terms of what time they have for themselves. And so the bottom line is, to unravel your expectations about what's important to you is part of what midlife's about. Disappointment equals expectations minus reality. So if your expectations based upon how you saw your life was going to be, the fact you're going to marry your soulmate and you're going to be making $1 million a year and your kids are going to go to an Ivy League school and you're 45 and looking at it, none of those are true. You have to then look at your expectations and unravel your expectations. And that's really what midlife is meant for. Now, this is an interesting piece, and I did some in my book, Learning to Love Midlife: 12 Reasons Why Life Gets Better with Age. I did some research on this. Part of the reason why happiness goes up after a low point around 45 to 50 is because people actually lower their expectations in life.
Huh.
And now you could say like, oh, well, that means that they're depressed and they don't care about things anymore. No, it means that they have hopes still, and but they're more content. They're less about striving and focusing on the pursuit of happiness, which by the way is a very funny term because in some dictionaries, pursuit, the definition of pursuit is to chase with hostility.
Yes, exactly. I was gonna say
Um,
pursuit actually the word has a negative connotation.
yeah, so like you're pursuing happiness with hostility. Yeah, yeah, you see it at the mall during the holidays, that's for sure. You used to. Nobody's at the mall anymore. So long story short is there's just a sense that you have to have enough time and space to say, what matters to me now? And then you bet on that instead. And that's a hard one. And that's why, MEA exists. We're the first midlife wisdom school, a place where people look at how they have cultivated and harvested their wisdom, and they want to share it out there in the world. But also it's a place where they like sort of figure out their transitions in life, their relationship with aging, and how do you cultivate purpose at 50 or 60, because it might be different than how you would have done it at 20 or 30.
You cite in several prior interviews, and I love the idea. You cite the idea that your purpose in life is to find your gift. Your work in life is to develop that gift, and you find meaning in your life by giving it away, which is basically where you are right now. Well, I am as well, and I'd love you to expand on that because I think it's a really cool roadmap.
Yeah, and that's a quote from David Viscott, an
Right? Yeah.
author.
Yeah.
And I cite him quite a bit. I actually have changed it recently in my own language and say the purpose of life is to discover your wisdom. The work of life is to develop it, and the meaning of life is to give it away. And whether it's wisdom or gift, either one works. And it speaks to this idea that part of our role here on this planet is to live by the creed of Mark Twain, who said, there are two most important days in your life: the day you were born and the day you figured out why. And the figured out why speaks to that idea: what's your gift? What's your wisdom? And then the piece that I think is really important, because it's really more the meaning of life, is moving that gift and wisdom and sharing it with others. And so that you are doing something to make the species better. And that may sound, when I say the species better, that may sound like, oh, okay, well, I have to go save the world. No, it just means like you're treating your nephew or your niece well, or your granddaughter, or you have a mentee who's 40 years younger than you, who you're learning from as well. But it's the small things. It really is. You're involved in a political activism thing in your community, and it's intergenerational, and you're teaching some things along the way. So I just really think that that quote is beautiful because it helps us to see that we have our own individual wisdom fingerprints, and when it comes to wisdom, I like to say our painful life lessons are the raw material for our future wisdom, which speaks to the idea that wisdom is something that's very homegrown. It's the school of hard knocks. It is learning how to metabolize your life experience, and that's not something AI does for us.
Part of what you talk about life experience is while you're simultaneously giving back. I love the idea that it's something you champion. I find really invigorating. The idea that you should always put yourself in the position of becoming a beginner.
Yeah. Well, I mean, curiosity and pursuing new experiences and openness to new experiences are two of the most correlated variables with living a longer, healthier, happier life. So there's a guy named Peter Drucker, famous management theorist and author, and he had a practice every 2 years after age 50. He would study something and become one of the world's leading experts on it, and it had nothing to do with his career, which was being a business school professor and an author. And he did that partly because he felt like learning and curiosity was like the elixir for the soul. We often call it lifelong learning, and I think that's a fine phrase. But lifelong learning is like, okay, well, I'm learning to, photograph at 70 or at 30. At MEA, we call it long life learning. Long life learning is a subset of lifelong learning in that it's focused on how do you curate a life that's as deep and meaningful as it is long, and how do you understand the life stages and your evolution as a human as you're getting older. And so that's to me, more important than learning how to photograph. Um, Now, I'm not saying you shouldn't learn to photograph as well, but we've sort of dumped all of lifelong learning into either skills that are going to build your career, like, okay, go out and become a software engineer, or fun hobby kind of things. And very few of them have been sort of focused on the evolution of who you are as a human. And that's really what we focus on. And because we believe that the social science on longevity has been proven that it's actually more important, how you, that mindset thing, how you feel about aging, how you focus on having a growth mindset, how you cultivate purpose in your life, how you think of friendship as a practice. All of the things I just mentioned, all of which are part of our MEA program, are the tools and ingredients for extending your longevity. And yes, it's great to do cold plunges and infrared saunas and stem cell regeneration. Maybe over time, those physical science activities will extend your life longer than the social science. But right now, it's the blue zones, and Dan Buettner's a friend and he's on our faculty at MEA. And it's the social science that actually predominates in terms of living a longer, healthier, happier life.
So when you, let's say, when you come to the academy, whether it's in Baja or in New Mexico, what does somebody do there actually? What are the classes or the meditations or the experiences that you're looking for people to indulge in?
Well, so we do online programs as well, but
Yeah, I know. Well, I'll get to that in a minute. Yeah, I
okay.
know.
And for the in-person programs, we have a beachfront campus in Baja, an hour north of Cabo, and we have this Santa Fe campus, 2,600 acres regenerative horse ranch. Similar program in both campuses. It's 5-night program, and it's a combination of learning how to get in touch with long lost dreams and maybe even your voice of what's important to you. And it's really easy to lose track of these things when you're on the treadmill. It's also about learning the 3 stages of any transition: the ending of something, the messy middle, and the beginning of something. And what are the coping mechanisms during each of those transitional stages? It's about how to actually look for purpose in new ways that are not just about having something on your resume, but what's the small p purpose things in your life that are important. It's about learning how to, in a group setting, understand what wisdom or advice you could offer someone younger than you and where that came from. What was the life experience that led you to that wisdom? It's about understanding what gets better with age. So you're in a workshop typically with about 24 people. Let's on average about 24 people. The 2 core workshops we have that our team leads are navigating transitions and cultivating purpose. Those are the 2. And then we have all these guest faculty members, everybody from Elizabeth Gilbert to Arthur Brooks. Oh gosh, Krista Tippett, uh, Michael Franti, the musician, uh, a lot of famous people who come and lead the workshop with our facilitators on a particular theme. So when Dan Buettner comes, it's about longevity and blue zones. When Elizabeth Gilbert comes, it's about awakening magic in midlife. When Michael Franti comes, it's about finding your rhythm in midlife and beyond. When Annie Lamott comes, it's about the upside of aging and learning how to write as you get older. So it's there's nothing like it. I mean, there are retreat centers out there, and I for 10 years was on the board of the Esalen Institute, and the most famous personal growth retreat center in the U.S. And the bookstore there is named after me because I've been a big fan, supporter. Having said that, Esalen doesn't have a curriculum. It has a bunch of wonderful faculty members. And if you're going to go do an Esalen experience, it's all about, I mean, yes, it's about the food and it's about the hot springs and the spa, but it's all, and from the classroom perspective, it's all about whoever the faculty member is. For us, we actually have a curriculum. So it really is a school. There's actually a program. And then this guest faculty members who come in have to fit within our curriculum.
You can also take classes online. I think the navigating transitions, the cultivating purpose, and there's what was the third one? Oh, owning wisdom. Yeah. So
And reframing retirement. Reframing retirement, we also do.
yeah, yeah. And so how does one approach those like online? I mean, how do you sign up? What?
The thing that's interesting about what's online is we wanted to have the online experience be almost like being in person. So it's much more collegial. You get to know everybody else in it's in the 6 week or 8 week course. Some of the courses are like a summit; they're like a week long. um, but you're learning things, and some of the learning is asynchronous, online, but a lot of the learning happens, in live, Zoom calls like the one we're having right now. And we have breakout groups and things like that. We also have 58 regional chapters around the world.
Oh, okay.
So if you become an alumni, whether it's online or in person, you go back to wherever it is, Chicago or London or Mexico City, and there's a collection of people there. We have 6,500 alumni now, who do monthly events together.
Based on all this, do you think we're making any progress in eliminating or at least reducing what you call age apartheid?
I think we've stemmed the flow. I think the trend line was bad. The trend line was bad. When you get older, you just you throw all the old people over in retirement communities and nursing homes, and when you're young, you just hang out with other young people. And I think there's an awareness that having some age diversity is important, including in companies. One of my chief things I've advocated for is how do companies think of age diversity as important of a diversity metric as race or gender or sexual orientation. And I believe that. I believe that age diversity is really beneficial to companies. And 10 years ago, no one was talking about that. So I think that's encouraging that HR departments are now thinking about it.
But you also talk about something even more advanced than that, and I think you called it gender fluidity.
Yeah, age fluidity. No,
Age fluidity. Okay.
yeah, gender
No, age
fluidity.
fluidity. Sorry, age fluidity. I'm sorry,
Yeah,
age fluidity, not gender fluidity.
gender fluidity is out there. I am piggybacking off a term that's become sort of
No, that's a hot topic right now.
it's a hot topic,
No.
and so I'm just saying.
Let's go back to age fluidity. Yeah.
Yeah, so age fluidity is the idea that you could potentially be all the way ages you've ever been or will ever be. So you don't have to be defined by your generation. It's different than being timeless or ageless. When you say someone's ageless or timeless, you're sort of saying age or time is bad because you're saying, oh, I'm giving you a compliment because I'm saying you don't have that. And what I'm saying is no, you could be a 40-year-old acting like a 60-year-old or a 20-year-old, and it depends on the context of who you're with. And long story short is, I think age fluidity should become a thing. I am an age fluid person. And
In what way? Be
I
specific.
I have the sense of humor of a 14-year-old boy. I have the wisdom of an 85-year-old, sage. Um, I have the physicality of someone probably 5 years younger than me. Um, and so, I don't think, and let's also on the physical science side of things, chronological age is, based upon when you were born, but biological age has everything to do with, your organs. And they're starting to be able to tell you your brain is, you're 60-year-old, I'm 64. So you're 64 years old and your brain is 58 and your liver is 72 and your heart is 49. And so in some ways we're going to end up becoming the composite of many ages, not just one.
Modern medicine allows you to do that, and which is one of the reasons why two people need to be much more on a daily basis, much more aware of their own health and much more their own advocate for their health. Um, what are the five things you are most grateful for that came with age?
Certainly wisdom. I do believe that I make better decisions today than I did 20 years ago. Secondly, I am I'm less attached to what other people think of me. Thirdly, I'm less emotionally reactive. Fourthly, I feel a growing sense of spiritual connection with something bigger than myself. And I can sort of feel like when my soul is perking its head up to speak. And number five is I think I probably have a better sense of humor about myself. All of our senses over the course of getting older, our eyesight goes worse, our ear, hearing gets worse, our taste buds aren't quite what they used to be, but our sense of humor, we can have it till the end. And if you think about all these famous comedians like Dick Van Dyke and George
I was
Burns
just
and
saying George Burns. I could remember him when he
Phyllis
was 100. Yeah,
Phyllis Diller, Betty White. I mean, all these, comedians tend to live a long time.
they do. Yeah, they do.
And there's something about having a sense of humor that allows you to live to an old age.
Well, I mean, look, if you don't have a sense of humor, you're kind of sunk in every level. First of all, you can get people to pay more attention to you if you have a good sense of humor, if you approach things from an air of lightness. But also, you could people don't have a sense of humor. It shows on their face. It's worse than not using. It's worse than not using moisturizer or a mask. It just kind of sort of sucks out the fun from the soul. But you mentioned, wait, you said something in the fourth one. Oh, what is it? You mentioned the fourth thing about things that perk up your soul. What does perk up your soul?
This week I have a daily blog called Wisdom Well. I normally keep it pretty apolitical. I focus on other things. But this week, what perked up my soul was this deep sense that I need to speak up. My soul is telling me, my brain is telling me, don't speak up about these things, Chip, because um, MEA does its best to be welcoming to everybody of every political persuasion. But I felt a deep need, my soul felt a need to voice some of what I was seeing, but give it a policy perspective. So it was occasionally me ranting and being a little bit anti-Trump, but generally it was me offering policy solutions that I thought were, sensible and hopefully wise. So, so that's one example. Another example is wanting solitude. I was an extreme introvert as a kid. I became an extreme extrovert as a young adult and into most of my adulthood. And I'm going back to being more of an introvert. And that introversion, that need for solitude, the word soul and solitude are very similar. And the idea that I need space to write, I need space to feel and think, I need space to just sort through and to refuel myself. I mean, if you need to refuel yourself by being alone, that's an introverted quality. And that I think has a lot to do with my soul speaking up and saying, slow down. Um, and then there's just, the connection to something bigger in life. And, uh, I've gotten very involved in interfaith communities, and we're doing a private retreat here with interfaith ministers, rabbis, and monks at our Santa Fe campus to help make sense of, how do you renew the spirit of the people who are trying to renew spirits out there in the world, or souls in the world. And so there's a lot to it, and there's one whole chapter in Learning to Love Midlife on that topic.
Your website is www.chipconley.com, correct? Do I got it right?
That's my personal website, and then
Yeah, but
there's the MEA website, which is meawisdom.com.
I mean, I was gonna say the next one is meawisdom.com. So which people should go to which one first?
Well, I think if you want to learn more about me, go to the Chip Conley site. If you want to learn more about MEA, go to that site, and you'll find on both of them the blog, and I also post the blog on LinkedIn.
Yeah.
So
Well, I think people should go to your personal site first because I think it's really important for them to learn about you. You just listen to you speak is just it basically very inspiring and offers an incredible amount of clarity.
thank you.
You're welcome. But it's about because so many people approach age with such trepidation and such fear, and very often it's way too much about what don't I have anymore. What did I lose? Not just my looks or my six pack, whatever. It's just look, people disappear, people come out of your life, your income may change, There's too much time spent looking back instead of looking forward. And I think what one of your strengths is the insistence that it's about taking what you've learned yesterday to know where to go tomorrow.
Yeah.
And
Thank you.
that's really key. So I will ask you probably what's an obvious question, but are you a happy grown up?
Yeah, I am. I would say I'm even more importantly a joyous grown up because as JD Salinger, the author of Catcher in the Rye, said, happiness is a solid and joy is a liquid. And what he meant by that was that happiness can sometimes be circumstantial, whereas joy can be something that's sort of flowing from within you. And I am feeling both happiness and joy these days.
Well, happiness is something that's actually momentary. Something sparks it. Happiness comes from the outside. Joy comes from the inside.
I agree.
You could be having a shitty day. That doesn't mean you're not a joyous person. Thank you so much, Chip. Thank you for listening to the Happy Grown Up Podcast. And if you enjoyed this conversation, please subscribe to our weekly newsletter on Substack, which will enlighten and entertain you with advice and inspiration on all aspects of new aging. From a new way to inspire yourself daily in 10 minutes, to what to pack for a romantic getaway, what not to say to cheer up a sick friend, and how to be invigorated by a new circle of friends, and a host of algorithms, lighthearted but savvy rules to live by. And join us next week for a new edition of The Happy Grown Up. I'm Hal Rubenstein, asking you to smile at the person you see in the mirror. After all, you're still here. That alone should make you happy.